I had a hard time with these sections. I at the end of this section 53, at the end of the, right before chapter 2, I do not have a very clear sense of what being toward death means. It has something to do with anxiety, and anxiety not as a mere emotion. He at least in the Stambaugh edition added some or has some footnotes that were apparently I think I forgot exactly what it said that in the introduction. I think they're comments that Heidegger put on his text. So I think they're actually Heidegger's comments. And he says, this anxiety, being toward death is essentially anxiety. And then a footnote says, but not only anxiety, and certainly not anxiety as a mere emotion. So it's not that, but anyway, I just don't really. And then on the beginning of chapter 2, I think I know what he's out for, to use his language, but I don't really. Anyway, it's all pretty murky in my mind. Maybe we should start with the being toward death. I read on the last, let's see, it's on Heidegger 266 in the middle, where he gives, I guess, his kind of definition. Being toward death can thus be summarized as follows. Anticipation reveals to Dasein its lostness in the they self and brings it face to face with the possibility to be itself, primarily unsupported by concern that takes care, but to be itself in passionate, anxious freedom toward death, which is free of the illusions of the they, factical, and certain of itself. I don't really know what that means.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss it too. Forgive me, I have kids coming to and through here. I wanted to discuss it too because it seemed like he was saying that almost like viewing death as an actuality or an event is a part of being inauthentic. But if you look at it as something that is not yet to be or could be, but aware of it from the perspective of an end, that it kind of almost shapes projects in a way, I guess. Like I viewed it as like that fear is a mood or an attunement when you view death as an event, but dread seems to be when you view death as an end to all your possibilities of projects, which he seems to think is authentic. And I wanted to discuss that because that's a lot to unpack, and that's just one of the many questions I have tonight.
And just to note this point too, this is at the near the bottom of Heidegger 261, the bottom of the Sternbach 250. He explicitly says, thus, if being toward death is not meant as, this is, echoes some of the things Joseph was saying, but it's not meant as an actualization of death, neither can it mean to dwell near the end in its possibility. This kind of behavior would amount to thinking about death, thinking about the possibility, how and when it might be actualized. Brooding over death does not completely take away from it its character of possibility. It is always brooded over as something coming, but we weaken it by calculating how to have death under our control. So it's also not brooding on death, right? Whatever this being toward death is, it's not like contemplating it and brooding over it and thinking about it and mulling it over. It's not that either. So I just don't have a clear idea what it actually is. Actually, I don't have much of any idea what it actually is, except that it has something to do with anxiety and not as an emotion.
Hey, same boat. Maybe we'll get to some understanding by the end of the evening. Chase Hunter, what are your thoughts?
I guess the way
You're
that
you're muted.
I got yeah, I guess the way that I kind of tried to piece it together using like you know, I saw certain parts of it as like outlaying these sort of vocabulary terms that are being employed in sort of specific ways. Like you're saying, Nevitt, like anxiety not as a mere feeling. So I kind of tried from there. I was like, all right, let's just see first what are the vocab terms, so to speak, or the puzzle pieces here according to his definitions or terms that he's using to fit this together into a semi-coherent picture. And then from there, can I then understand what he's trying to say through my own language, like with that sort of system. So what I got from it was being towards death is an anxiety. Um, Daseins on most individual being is anxiety, on Heidegger 266. It's like the first line. But the state of mind which can hold all open the utter and constant threat to itself arising from Dasein's own most individualized being is anxiety. So being towards death is an anxiety, and it's essentially an anxiety, but and I was like, okay, an anxiety that's this sort of state of mind. It's this this I guess attunement toward this inner ownmost possibility. And what was the word that he used, at least in the Macquarie and Robinson, was anticipation. So like I was like, okay, I guess the being towards death is an anxiety, or is anxiety, and that anxiety is like just a word that he's using to describe this sort of mode of anticipation of this constant threat, in a sense, to one's own being. Okay, sure, I can kind of work with that, right? It gets more complicated when he starts talking about freedom towards death. And I could kind of follow it. I was like, okay, sure. And in fact, here, I'll just this kind of this italicized passage, because then I have an understanding, but it brings me only so far, and I want to get to where it brings me and ask my like kind of my question here. But it's in italics on Heidegger 266. I think in the middle of Heidegger 266, it's that small paragraph. Anticipation reveals to Dasein its lostness in the they self and brings it face to face with the possibility of being itself, primarily unsupported by concernful solitude, but of being itself rather in an impassioned freedom towards death, a freedom which has been released from the illusions of the they, and which is factical, certain of itself, and anxious. So I was like, oh wow, that's kind of exciting. I read that and I was like, ooh, that's what an idea, what a concept. I like that. You know, that passage was written kind of in an exciting way, I guess. But I was like, okay, so the goal here, I don't not goal. I mean, he does actually kind of talk about it as sort of like a goal, but so I'll use that word. The goal here is this freedom towards death, both in understanding what it is and in actualizing it in some sense. And he talks about how do we actualize that? Is it like bringing about death, or is it, you know, whatever? It's not any of those. But in fact, in this next section too, Dassein's attestation for an authentic potentiality for being and resoluteness, he gets into this freedom towards death. In order to understand it, we have to hear this attestation, this attesting, this testimony, and that was something that I really didn't understand. But it opens up a good question: how can one be authentically oneself when one is a product of the they? And I basically just got this sort of formula, which I didn't really understand the necessary meaning of immediately, but it was that the they self is brought back from the they. That's an action that happens to the they self. The they self, as the subject, experiences the predicate of being brought back from the they, and then through this process, it is transformed into authentic being oneself. And I was like, okay, so it's some sort of process in anxiety, in this state of anticipation of a threat, in other words, of taking the they self back in this through this non-relational potentiality. I got that part. Bringing the they self back from the they and making it authentic being of oneself. That was all. I guess that can kind of make sense, you know, in sort of a functional way. I mean, even if I don't have a sort of rock solid, like immediate experiential sort of thing, I can, which is, oh, I see that in my own life. Like I don't have that, but it makes sense formally. But there is a part here that stops where that stops for me. It stops being so coherent. And it's on Heidegger page 268, on the bottom paragraph of 268, where it's like, okay, we're supposed to get this authentic being for oneself, right? And I was like, okay, well, give me another. I kind of keep asking Heidegger, like, Okay, give me another example. Can you phrase that kind of differently, maybe? Can you, give me, say that normal or more, say that more normal, please. And he tries in this paragraph. And it made me question something. He said, in the following interpretation, we shall claim that this potentiality is attested by that which in Dasein's everyday interpretation of itself is familiar to us as the voice of conscience, Stimme des Gewissens. And in the last sentence of that paragraph, in the following analysis, conscience will be taken as something which we haven't advanced theoretically, and it'll be investigated in a purely existential manner with fundamental ontologies. Okay. Well, here's my question about this authentic being of oneself within the space of freedom towards death in anxiety, right? We're in the space of freedom towards death in a state of anxiety, in anticipation of a threat, and we are appropriating the they self, or maybe not appropriating, but we're bringing back the they self to be authentic being of oneself. Huzzah! Sounds good. We're like Lancelot, we're like the knights of the round table. I'm ready. But his word of like, how do you do that? What do we do? Whose mansion do we storm and who do we beat up? How do we get authentic being?
Well,
And he
yeah.
says, well, I just want to say he says this voice of conscience. And I just have this question before you. This is the last thing. This is my last sentence. Is living authentically equivalent to following one's consciousness or one's conscience, or does just having a conscience indicate the possibility of authenticity? That's what I'm questioning about this paragraph. Is he saying that following one's voice of conscience is how you live authentically? Because that would be kind of weird. Or is it just the fact of having a conscience? Is that an indication of the possibility of authenticity? Is a much more modest statement. That's my question. Sorry, didn't mean to steamroll you.
No. While you were saying that, I was thinking about how like there's a component of dread because he always uses dread as an individuation. So when we are experiencing this being towards death and freedom, we kind of see an end to something or an end to possibilities. And then in that dread of our projects that we don't know to complete, as we exist or continue to be towards it, it kind of individuates. And then to address your question, I don't know. I hate to follow it up with another question, but I'd go back to see what he says that like being towards something is like, because it's almost like he's saying that expectation and anticipation are two different things. Like there's a component of expecting something or seeing something as like an end that you want to avoid, like I'm going to end, and then you get into the Epicurean aspect of like where death is, I'm not, so we just want to avoid it. And like if we expect it, but if there's like, or maybe what we're looking for is anticipation in that regards, but if there's a possibility and approaching it in a meaningful way, how do we define being towards something then? Like what is his definition of being towards something?
Real quickly, like I wanted for Hunter's two questions. I maybe don't quite understand the questions because it doesn't seem like an or to me the way you put it. Remind me again. It was is it the fact is listening to one conscience the way which one behaves authentically, or is the fact that we have a conscience simply what proves that we can behave authentically? And it seems to me like Heidegger would say it's not an or. You know what I mean? Like you behave authentically by having a conscience. I'm proving that you can behave authentically by proving that you have a conscience. But I think it needs a bit more. Like as I was late, before you got to those two questions, I was, listening to you kind of lay down these elements as you understand them, and I'm largely on the same page, right? Like in the, how you've kind of laid it out. But there are a couple of things I wanted to say. First, one piece I felt like was missing, and then what I'm anticipating with regard to conscience. The first part that I thought was maybe missing from how you laid it out is what I'm picking up anyway is that what's the characteristic of the they self being towards death is that it's always possible. It's always a being towards death where it's never one's own death that one has to reckon with. You know what I mean? Like going to a funeral makes you think about death, but of course that's not you dying. You know what I mean? That's another funeral. And even being at the end of life and brooding about death, probably what's happening is you're thinking about all your experiences of death, and you're still fleeing from the authentic angst of really just confronting, the possibility of the end of all possibilities as such. So as long as you kind of take it as a present at hand or something that happens to other people, the key thing here for me anyway, between the they self being toward death and angst is that one takes death in its like own most, or, it's as mine and only mine. I can't use other people's deaths to really grapple with my own. You know what I mean? Because I didn't live their life, so I didn't, you know what I mean? So their death to me is not, you know what I mean? It's I don't know, something might as well be present at hand. So to me, that's an essential element, right? For death, between the they self being towards death and the authentic self being towards death is the ownmost death that the authentic self is facing, as opposed to the they self. Which leads me to the second thing, and I'm kind of anticipating, because I feel like there's more to go with him, fleshing out this notion of conscience. And it kind of overlaps a bit, honestly, with, I was just revisiting Kant's second critique, and, a bit of the, honestly, a bit of how he sets up the moral law and respect for the moral law and behaving out of respect for the moral law. Only here, I'm anticipating that for Heidegger, the conscience, it's not a moral category, it's not a theological category, and I have a question about him separating so clearly ontological and theological, but that's another thing. Not moral, it's not, what I'm anticipating, honestly, is if we could give conscience language, which he's trying to avoid, but if we could give it language, I want to say that it's like, its call is that golden rule of the modern man, that to thine own self be true.
Well, is it to thine own self be true in the like Aleister Crowley, like, do as thy will, that is the law, like that sort of,
Well, I'm
But
situated.
the law is love. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, but the law is love. So a little different, but anyways, yeah.
Selma.
I think you could talk about, I don't know if, at least the sense I've gotten so far, which isn't much that I've read, but is that he's examining conscience as, like everything else, as a phenomenon. So I would be surprised if he tries to extract some sort of content as to what conscience tells you to do, because
right.
He's specifically trying not to do that. So
kind of indicated it's beyond language. So like giving it language already degrades.
Yeah. So that, that's kind of what I anticipate. One thing I wanted to say, maybe what I've been asking him to do is, to help me understand what this means in more, I don't know what, maybe what I'm asking him is to explain what it means ontically. When I say, well, what does this being toward death mean? And he's explicitly not doing that yet. So, this is at the very end of whatever the section was right before chapter 2. It's on Heidegger 266, Stambach 255. Right after that quotation that Hunter read, that's in italics, the next paragraph, he says, this is like the second sentence, the existential project in which anticipation has been delimited has made visible the ontological possibility of an existential authentic being toward death. But with this, the possibility then appears of an authentic potentiality for being whole, and then in italics, but only as an ontological possibility. Of course, our existential project of anticipation stayed with those structures of Dasein gained earlier. Let Dasein itself, so to speak, project itself upon this possibility without proffering to Dasein the content of an ideal of existence forced upon it from the outside. And yet, this existentially possible being toward death remains, after all, I don't know how you pronounce that word, but existentially a fantastical demand. the ontological possibility of an authentic potentiality for being a whole of Dasein means nothing as long as the corresponding ontic potentiality of being has not been shown in terms of Dasein itself. So I think you know what, it seems like what I'm asking him is, well, what is the existential character of this? You know, what is the ontic character? And I think he's saying, well, I'm not in a position to say that yet.
No, that's the call of conscience.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying, right? So that the business about conscience in the next chapter is beginning to answer that question. And so, but he has, at least I don't think he's finished answering that question yet. So what I'm asking him for is really what he's about doing now in this second chapter. So I was expecting him, I think, to finish at the end of that section that we read first, what he's jumping into in the next chapter. So
I'm not going to use, I was going to indicate like possible answer to that question, but not from Heidegger. But if you imagine Camus' The Stranger, the beginning, right? Mama died today. What kind of being towards death is that? You know what I mean? And then whenever he's sentenced to death and he begins to live, what kind of being towards death is that? I think
Yeah.
gives us, a picture of the they self being towards death in this character. Merceau, I forget his name. And
I think
then
that's it.
and then whenever he becomes sentenced to death and that confronts him in an authentic ontological way, his character changes, kind of, you know what I mean? The perspective changes, his attitude towards life and its possibilities, changes. I think that's a key part too. Is at the moment, where he's sentenced to death, a whole array of possibilities of life are presented to him. And I think that's really drawing from this.
I thought so too. I have it in my notes, Eric, particularly on 254 for the Stamball where he says, because the anticipation of Dasein absolutely individualizes and lets it is the individualizing of itself, becomes certain of the wholeness of its potentiality of being. The fundamental attunement of anxiety belongs to this self-understanding of Dasein in terms of its grounds. And I have big letters, Camus, particularly absurdism next to that one on 254. Because how is death meaningful to me? If I'm being towards death, my perspective towards it is an enormous part of how meaningful it is to be towards death. So I feel like Heidegger's process ontology and his dread, and what's even more interesting on that idea is not only is your perspective key on being towards death and all your possibilities, you're not looking at it as an actualized event that you're trying to avoid or to slip into the they self. Since that dread individuates, it puts an enormous amount of responsibility on your projects, how you approach life, what you're doing with your time, knowing in its temporality it will end. So in a way, it kind of ties into the consciousness factor or the call or the voice, is that anticipation, the knowledge that it is ephemeral. Reminds me of that quote of Camus of do I kill myself or do I get a cup of coffee? Do I just look at it as an event where the they self disappears, or do I find a possibility of being and work on it? And if I do have all these possibilities of beings, which produces dread, what responsibility am I taking to complete those or to form meaning?
a fundamental question I have here, which my comments in the chat reflect, is who or what is this self anyway? Because he's gone to quite, he's gone to at some length to distance himself from a notion of subjectivity that is, sort of a more, I don't know, more common and more traditional notion of subjectivity. So what is this self? It can't be a Cartesian self, well, let me read. This is in the last section that was for today. It's on Heidegger, about the middle of Heidegger 272, on Stambach 263. the they self is summoned to the self. However, this is not the self that can become an object for itself on which to pass judgment, not the self that unrestrainedly dissects its inner life with excited curiosity, not the self that stares analytically at states of the soul and their backgrounds. The summons of the self in the they, interesting, the summons of the self in the they self, because again, you never completely get out of that, right? Does not force it inwards upon itself so that it can close itself off from the external world. The call passes over all this and disperses it so as to summon solely the self, which is in no other way than being in the world. And so I don't know what he means by self. I mean, I think, maybe I'm wrong here, but because he's using the word self, at least I think there's a real danger, at least for me, to think of the notion of the self in this sort of maybe traditional philosophical way, or even just in a contemporary cultural way, like literally the they self's notion of the self. So if you talk to just the they, right? If you just talk to people, what do you mean by self? Well, it's, me and my character and my wants and my desires and my personality traits. That's the self. And I don't think that's what he's talking about. And so I don't know what he is talking about, though. I mean, he says it's the self which is in no other way than being in the world. And yet that self that self qua being in the world is distinct from the they self. And yet it is still engaged in the world and engaged with others. Because he makes that explicit too. It's even though the they self or even though the authentic self is individualized, and in some sense, I don't think he would say it's isolated from the they self. I don't think you can do that, but it is somehow, has somehow resists the they self. It is nevertheless still being with others and being in a world. I mean, I could find the passage where he says that, but he's pretty explicit about that. And so I don't know what is this self that is not merely the they self, but is nevertheless engaged in the world with others. And at least I think is probably not the conventional notion of self as a wad of personality traits and desires and preferences and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think he basically says it's nothing. It's what anxiety discloses yourself to be, which is nothing determinately, so nothing ontically determinate, but instead it's understanding as a possibility. So we're always doing that. So one of the existential structures, is understanding. And understanding that goes along with projection. So we understand ourselves, we interpret ourselves through our projection of our possibilities. And the inauthentic self, the self of everydayness, understands itself according to the possibilities that the public interpretation has restricted it to, which is a kind of, let's make things, okay, so death is something that is veiled or covered over as something that it's not happening right now. Who cares? Whatever. Just understand yourself in terms of the public spectrum of meanings right here in the present, according to cultural conventions, and you're good. You don't need to think about your own possibilities, your own death, because that's going to happen later. Who cares? So that's kind of the inauthentic thing going on. And then authenticity is something where the self is understands itself according to a possibility that isn't the one that's restricted to the they self's public interpretation. So instead, it understands itself according to the possibilities that only it has. And that's where this individualization comes in. So death is this temporal limit of yourself. And that limit is what, because I understand myself as a possibility, that's ultimately the possibility that determines what I am in terms of a being in the world and temporality. So by understanding myself as absorbed in the present of the public's interpretation, you're avoiding looking at the individualized aspect of your possibilities, which would be according to your own temporal stretch, which is determined ultimately by its limit, the horizon, that's your death. So thinking about the possibility, my possibility as something that ultimately will come to an end. That's kind of the outermost point of, because I can't be at that point. It's impossibility to have any kind of possibility if I'm dead. So in that terms, it's showing the limit, and that limit is going to then give me the whole horizon by which I can interpret everything. So if I think that I'm going to die tomorrow, it's going to change how I understand my possibilities, something like that. As far as the self though, so yeah, it's kind of like there's really mainly like two sort of main aspects of it. I think he gets more detailed in the sections coming up, the call of conscience thing, because ultimately it's Dasein calling itself, but in these different aspects of itself. So ultimately it has to appeal to the self, the everydayness self, the they self. So I think okay, so at the very end of this section on the death section, he says, yeah, this is just kind of like the formal ontological aspect. Now this conscience thing is about the existential ontic phenomena that attest to how from the ontic perspective, which is also the perspective of Dasein absorbed in the they self, how it then has the phenomena that gives it the possibility of being authentic self. And that's the call of conscience, where from the perspective of the they self, what calls to you is that authentic self. And that's also going to be, I'm pretty sure that's anxiety, pretty much. So anxiety would be, that's where the public interpretations no longer have any significance. I can't interpret myself anymore in terms of ready to hand equipment of things in the world in relation to each other, and also to being with others. Instead, the only thing that's exposed to me is my own possibility to choose between that is a ferret. Sweet. Yeah. So Okay, I'll stop there. Did that help somewhat? I tried to make it as clear as possible, but yeah, it's I can definitely see why it's overwhelming and confusing. And I think part of the problem, at least with the call of conscience stuff, is that, just the way with reading schedules, we could only do a very small part at the beginning. And it's he's going to get way more uh, in depth about it coming up. Is I watched some YouTube videos that were on the sections coming up, and so he's gonna all the stuff before he's gonna put into this structure of the call of conscience based off the way that he talks about discourse, and all the whole care stuff where you've got care corresponds with the three temporal domains, also with care as these existential structures of thrownness, understanding, fallenness. Yeah, that's it. And then the other one is discourse, and the conscience is a mode of discourse, or the call is specifically. So he's gonna lay it all out in this whole grand structure, uh, according to that structure of discourse where he talks about, oh, for discourse to occur, there has to be something that is discourse to, and then something does the discourse. I'm just basically making this up because I can't remember the specifics, but he's going to follow this kind of differentiated structure. I think that's three-part, a tripart structure. And from that, he's going to give the whole rest of the book that we've done before kind of in terms of that. And so supposedly at the end of this section is something of he's somewhat kind of wrapping up. So he's giving a lot of section 1 combined with this thing about death, the beginning of division 2. So division 1, where you've got this formal structure of Dasein, but that's according to its everydayness. And now he said, okay, now we've got, with being towards death, that's the formal ontological thing of authenticity, because we need that. And then with the call of conscience, he's kind of wrapping it all up into one phenomena that is ontically possible. Yeah.
I wanted to zero in on a word that you stressed right when the ferret came up, and I kind of also think speaks to Nevitt's question as well. I think to kind of like radicalize it, because you brought up the word choice. There seems to be an element of choice, and in the Stambots 253, I've been looking for it. It's Heidegger 264 though, and maybe halfway down there's a paragraph. The most non-relational possibility is insuperable. But well, later, yeah, I'll just continue. Being toward this possibility lets Dasein understand that the most extreme possibility of existence, that of giving itself up, is imminent, but anticipation does not evade the impossibility of bypassing death, as does inauthentic being towards death, but frees itself for it. Becoming free for one's own death and anticipation liberates one from one's lostness in chance possibilities urging themselves upon us, so that the factual possibilities lying before the insuper possibility can first be authentically understood and chosen. And again, as you might imagine, lights go off. Chosen. Who or what? What is doing the choosing?
That's my fundamental question. Who or what is choosing?
Yeah, that one.
There's no mention of the will in here.
Yeah, I don't think I think okay, so this may hopefully I don't this isn't a tangent, but I think Heidegger in general is somewhat, from what I know at least of some of his later stuff, he's somewhat critical of the whole will idea. Not only in Schopenhauer but also in Nietzsche as well to a certain degree. Although his thing with Nietzsche is pretty complex and I definitely don't understand it really, but he thinks Nietzsche was kind of like a completion of metaphysics where it's about the will core of uh like techno control that that's what metaphysics is basically you understand entities in terms of something in which you have the will's control over them. And this is something so in the language of being in time, you'd say this is kind of like the ultimate public inauthenticity, but that is like that's the dominant form in which being has disclosed itself in this epoch. So I'm kind of blending a whole bunch of uh, new and old Heidegger together. But anyways, that's somewhat of a tangent. Okay. But the choice thing. So he presents um so from the perspective of the they self, that's this inauthentic thing, and that here's the call of conscience, which is that discloses that it has a choice between well, often its authentic possibilities, which is also, I think, pretty much its authentic self, or its inauthentic possibilities that can kind of go back into being absorbed into it. I mean, almost kind of like the Matrix thing, where oh, you find out I'm in the Matrix. Like you can still kind of choose to go back into it and just forget about it, get lost in it, or I can be like Neo and be like, yeah, I'm gonna no reality, truth,
But
and
what is it that's choosing? I mean, if you
yeah.
say
So that I do, so I don't really know.
if you say Dasein is choosing, I mean Dasein is
Yeah,
it's there, right? Like Dasein is it's there. So where is this choice coming from?
yeah. So he's got. I know he has. I think something. So there's the call of conscience, and then I think though to be okay, I'm somewhat speculating here, but I think to be open to that call, you already have to have chosen something about to be simply open to it, to have this anticipatory resolution towards being open to hear the call of conscience. But then, of course, that just kicks the ball further. Well, what does that? In which case, I don't know. I mean, he obviously it's some aspect of Dasein that is doing this. I'm not exactly sure what I'd even call it, even on even in my speculative mode. I'm not even sure really what to call it. I know he talks about wanting to have a conscience, so there's kind of like something there. I think that is the tripartite thing that's going on. Get the they self for the most part is just like, oh yeah, okay. What's going on? You know, I'm lost in fallenness in the they self. And then you've got the call of conscience, but then for the they self to even be open to the call of conscience, it needs some kind of modification so that it wants to even hear it. And that's the key. That's okay. Well, what chooses the choice of the choice? You're talking about, yeah, there's you can choose to choose those possibilities. And but I think you can always go further and say, well, then what chooses the choice of the choice? And wait, yeah, it's an infinite regress, obviously. Yeah. So I don't know how he gets out of that. I guess we'll just have to see.
I know I hate to say this at this juncture, but I mean, I'm just gonna throw it out there again. Like, I'm not the only one. There's a lot of, I mean, yeah, there are a lot of scholars who don't take Heidegger's attempt to move beyond subject dichotomy as a success.
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably agree with that. I mean, I think he did a good critique of a lot of ways, but did he ultimately overcome it? I think it'd be pretty, in terms of the scholarly literature on this, I think it's pretty rare for somebody to say that it was a complete success in that. And I think even Heidegger basically said that. So his later stuff, he thought that it was still too much locked in this subject object Cartesian kind of thing. And yeah, perhaps that's, if we're talking about this infinite regress of, well, what is the self behind the self that chooses the self? Maybe that's a sign that indeed we are stuck still in this subject object kind of thing. So yeah, good observation.
The
Though
only way,
somewhat not disturbing, but
Yeah, it's not, and
disappointing maybe.
it's not necessarily the best best place to point it out, because I think we should still try to struggle with it and be sympathetic. But at the same time, like I wanted to say, because we have, and because we're still at a loss and grasping, like I'm just throwing this out there so that we don't keep trying to make sense of it as if no, there is a missing piece in the box. Maybe there isn't that missing piece in the box. Maybe we got a jigsaw with a couple missing pieces. So don't stress too much. You know what I mean? But you do have to do like an earnest search before you decide that piece is missing. You know what I mean? And you still want to put all the pieces that did come out of the box together as best as you can, even if there are in the end a couple pieces missing.
Yeah, yeah. Good analogy.
the only way, this is pure speculation. The only way I've been able to think about it is that if he's describing what happens phenomenologically, he may be, so if this is descriptive more than prescriptive, then he could say something like there are ontic Daseins in which this occurs, in which, so the self is primarily distributed in the they. So the they self, I am one of the many, and my choices are primarily just those that are handed to me. There are some, I don't know, this has echoes of Nietzsche for me, but there are some that observe that almost empirically observing that sort of, they don't ever break out of the they, but they sort of lift themselves up in some sense. I don't mean like lift themselves up, but I mean, I'm kind of imagining this web of relations. They kind of manage to kind of pull up from that web and exhibit a certain kind of individuality, in which these, individualities in which they actualize particular possibilities that are not merely those handed to them. I think you're still going to be, like we've talked about a time or two ago, whether you probably can't just completely break free and make radically new choices, but you can. These particular people do this, and so if he's giving it, if it's a descriptive thing, and saying, and then what I'm going to say is that it is this call of conscience that makes this possible. He may not be trying to give an account of where this call comes from, or at least in absolute terms, or you know what I mean? He may not be trying to answer some of those questions. He may just be like saying descriptively, this is what I see. And that there are Daseins that exhibit these features. And as far as doing an ontology, that's all I'm going to do, is explain how this happens. Did that make sense?
Yeah, I think the Nietzsche connection helps somewhat. Is okay, the way I'm thinking of it is, if we just accept something of a very general kind of interpretation of Nietzsche, but it'd be something like the distinction between an Übermensch or Übermenschen of some type that creates values versus well, Untermensch or herd
Yeah,
morality
Untermensch, like me.
person, somebody who just kind of accepts established values and doesn't create them for themselves based out of their own most potentiality, to throw in some Heidegger in there. I don't know.
Yeah, there seems to be. I mean, on my reading, Nietzsche has so-called what I would term higher individuals. So not necessarily just Ubermensch and everybody else, but there's these so-called higher individuals that are those who they're like on the way to Ubermensch or something. And so there are these higher individuals that exhibit this more individuality, but I think it was maybe in a conversation with Eric or somebody. I tend to think in these sort of, well, there's these kind of people and these kind of people. There's probably some kind of continuum. Yeah, it was in conversation with you, Eric, when we were talking about, well, that you exhibit certain features of the higher men in certain situations because, and like with your situation in high school and so on. But yeah, so maybe something like that. Maybe there's something similar to Nietzsche's notion of these higher men who become more of an individual, and this notion of these authentic individuals. Some connection there perhaps. But I think Nietzsche too, at least on my reading, he doesn't tell you how to become one. He just, I think, would say there are people who exhibit these characteristics. And I don't think he's going to try to say, well, if you want to become a higher man, this is how you do it. He's just like, well, there are people who exhibit these characteristics and people who exhibit herd characteristics, and that's what I see. So maybe Heidegger is doing something similar.
Yeah, I definitely see him lifting that aristocratic element from Nietzsche. But it's not just from Nietzsche, right? It's also from his environment, the late 20s, early 30s, Germany, mass culture really becoming a distinct, identifiable thing. I think Nietzsche could kind of detect it, but I think in the early 20th century, we actually give it a name, and with the advent of radio and lots of technologies, like mass culture really arrives and causes for the betters, the elites, the establishment, all sorts of consternation. And so Heidegger's kind of aristocratic appeal to, a few people kind of being authentic selves, and the rest of, those masses, and insofar as they just, watch Netflix and, get a sense of self through the possibilities of the characters on the programs of Netflix, they're never authentic people. You know what I mean? They're just the hoi polloi.
Yeah. And they were both drawing heavily from the Greeks, both of them. And well, I mean, a lot, not just them. A lot of Western philosophers have drawn heavily from the Greeks who were big into the aristocracy.
Yeah, I think also the Kierkegaard influence
Mm.
is interesting here because I think a lot of his notions about the public comes from the what is that? I think it's called The Modern Age, I believe, some Kierkegaard essay where he first starts to talk about stuff like newspapers and media and about how the media and the way that they have set up this discourse in the modern age, they hate individuals that don't go along with public interpretations. And I think he's getting it somewhat from that, but then I think he does have that kind of Nietzschean aristocratic thing going on.
Just about the same size.
Yeah.
Although I'll admit, I've got some of that too. I mean, if you look at justifications for liberal education, so for example, when I bemoan the fact that the liberal arts are being slowly thrown out of the academy, it's not even an academy anymore, so that college is more and more becoming a trade school for engineers and business people and so on, and there are colleges who have who are systematically cutting off chunks of the liberal arts and the humanities and just eliminating from the curriculum. I want to say that's a bad thing, because I want to say that the liberal arts and so on, one, make people better citizens as a utilitarian, but also I think make people more interesting, more well-rounded humans. And
Yeah, you don't want to fund the rebellion. An educated proletariat is terrifying.
but I mean, is that, people could argue that's kind of an aristocrat. I mean, I think, there's a big backlash to education, especially in conservatives. And that's like, you fucking academics, you think you're so smart and special. Well, you're not.
But I mean, here's key, like it's not aristocratic because you're embedding it in a mission of public education. You know what I mean? You're not saying, poetry, Shakespeare, Dante, Goethe, those are for the educated. Those are for the people who have leisure time. Those are people who can understand what they're picking up because, they were taught Greek and Latin and that, you know what I mean? Because, you know what I mean? Only the right people really can read Goethe and understand it. And I think if you say no, fuck no, you know what I mean? Like I'm going to go into a middle school and I'm going to give of course they're not going to understand this completely, but they're going to get a taste of it. And it's the beginning of a journey open to, everybody come, that to me is actually, like a culmination of the logic of the humanities, but not restricted again for all of humanity. Right. And not restricted to a subsection, an elite.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've told this story before, so pardon me for repeating. And I don't remember the lineage exactly, but I can't even remember the names. But the people, there were guys who started the sort of great books, tradition at the University of Chicago and other places. At some point, some of these guys established these discussion groups in the public libraries in New York City, and they explicitly tried to draw from the entire social spectrum, white collar, blue collar, everybody. And they were reading, and it was mostly classical literature. It was mostly, Homer, Shakespeare, and so on. And their conviction was that everybody has, like you said, at least some capacity to understand this. And you've seen, like, I don't know, you've probably heard these stories about people taking Shakespeare into prisons, and that certain Shakespeare plays, the prisoners get it a whole lot more than your average theater goer does, because Shakespeare's dealing with themes that these guys have to grapple with that most of us don't. And so, yeah, that's a good thing to remember, that trying to spread that through the public is a anti-aristocratic impulse, I think.
Right. And moreover, I'll just add, because it's a favorite soapbox of mine. I found, much to my chagrin, that quite a lot of public school teachers hold out an aristocratic view of the humanities. That, like, just for example, Joyce's Araby from Dubliners, I use as a short story when I taught 12th grade. And I had fellow teachers tell me, oh no, that's Joyce. That Joyce, you're giving them Joyce? James Joyce? No. They can't get it. They don't, you're just, wait, they need to get to that when they get to college, if they go to college, but these kids, they're just 17, 18, like, don't be trying to do that. And similarly, I don't know if you're familiar with Isaiah Berlin's Two Concepts of Liberty. That's a really good article, to to kind of open up a discussion about freedom and liberty and what we're doing in this society. And it's academic, it's a little bit heady, but if you take some 17 or 18-year-olds and you explain a few little things and read with them, they can get it. They can get it. But again, I had fellow teachers who said, I can't read this article. Why do you think these 17 or 18-year-olds can read this article? Like,
Yeah, we had middle school students reading What is Enlightenment?
right? Yes, yes. Have the courage to use your own reason. And middle schoolers should be told that. You don't need, that's another argument. That's another argument. I mean, I used to tell, fellow teachers, like, they should be able to read a poem, a short story, and come to their own ideas, And they're like, no, that's dangerous, And they should be able to criticize the world around them. No, 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 that's dangerous. These kinds of things they may learn when they go to college, if they go to college, right? So in order to be a critical thinker and have your own thoughts, you have to belong to a certain socioeconomic class, the college educated. Otherwise, no, stop thinking for yourself. Stop critiquing.
Yeah, and what maybe is ironic about that in Heideggerian terms, and again, I'm just speculating here, but that it seems like that there's a possibility there of an aristocratic attitude of that kind, really just valorizing the they self of a particular class, so, and like you've said, that teachers complain about allowing students to critique the received interpretation and so on, that you have these interpretations that the educated classes and so on accept, and it's aristocratic, but on the other hand, it is another form of the they self. Whereas when you allow people, when you create an environment where people can ask real questions, then you're more likely to get people to think up new ideas that they've never thought about. One of the tutors at St. John's I've told this story before, told me that at St. John's College, they get a lot of sort of dysfunctional high school students that don't really fit anywhere. And so they go to this liberal arts program. And for one thing, they have to be able to pay for it. So there is a filtering there. But they're these students that probably the kind of students, that the faculty is saying, well, just shut up and do your homework and quit asking these uncomfortable questions. And what this tutor, she said, when these students finally figure out that you really want to know what they think about this work, this poem or this play or this physics text, she said, it's like dropping a match on a table full of gasoline. It just ignites. And, that's probably a better, I doubt that Heidegger could say, well, now here's how you make, how you encourage people to be whatever, but at least that is an environment in which it seems to me you're more likely to begin to have people asking authentic questions, and beginning to get a sense of independence and individuality in that environment than you are in many environments. But, maybe Heidegger would just say, bullshit, bullshit, bullshit. I have no idea.
Yeah, so I wonder, based off of, so from this ontological level, it's a universal, these existential structures are universal for Dasein. So that possibility to be authentic is a universal for Dasein. So that wouldn't be subject to any kind of like aristocratic kind of thing. But then his thing would be, well, who actually becomes authentic? Then that's only a select amount of people. Although he hasn't, I guess, necessarily said that, other than that, yeah, in our average everyday way of living, we Dasein are usually absorbed in inauthenticity. And then authenticity is this special modification of that. So I guess it kind of depends on, well, what really determines uh exactly what makes, okay, so I guess to go back to the earlier thing about, well, what chooses the choice and all that, that's really kind of what it comes down to. And I think maybe the reason why it can't be answered is because it doesn't have a formal answer. It almost, you need almost like actual existence to plug in the hole and give you just the brute reality of, can you do it or not? Um, in which case, you're then, I think you have to consider maybe the whole non-relational aspect of Heidegger's authenticity is maybe questioned at that point, because it seems like there are at least social factors, I would say, probably, that determine whether somebody can ultimately choose something, get outside of, okay, even if we put in the language of, yeah, a lot of people are going to, their worldview is going to be determined by the time and age and the class, the people, all these things that are around them, their family, their friends, what field they go into, race, all these things. But then who can kind of go past those particulars and have some kind of
Nobody.
grasp possibilities outside of that?
Nobody. Sorry.
Calm down, Arthur. Calm down.
You're trying to get a transcendent view, you know what I mean? A historical view. Like even Heidegger really should reckon with the fact, and I think somewhat does, with the fact that his position is one articulated within a historical, stage, you know. So yeah, sorry.
At least something Chase said once, maybe think that the later Heidegger probably does that better than this Heidegger in terms of historicizing his view.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. Although I think still his view of what that history is just pretty bizarre, I guess. So it's a history of being, and this is where you get into the whole, it conceals itself by revealing itself as a certain thing. So it reveals itself through technology, but in that revealing of itself as technology, it conceals itself simultaneously. And then that's kind of like the structure of his history of being, where it's different revelations are made throughout history of what being is interpreted as, or not interpret. That's actually okay. So the thing is, being is what dictates this. And I think that's one of the key things that he is. Being is kind of the active party in it, and he thought that being in time, Dasein was too much the active party in terms of being, which also kind of goes into the whole choice situation. I guess all things to just kind of keep in the back of your mind.
I mean that the sort of picture I had in my mind that I was describing earlier is kind of, maybe it's more consistent with that later Heidegger, and thinking there is this being doing something, or there is this ontological activity, as it were, and that we are part of, we are manifestations of that, and in through that you have more or less authentic people popping up, and you can talk about choice, but choice is really just an observation that some people do this and other people don't, or that some people do it to a higher degree than other people. And I mean, because that's where I think Nietzsche's kind of is more or less a determinist, but I think he's sort of a compatibilist, but so you could say that there's this individualizing activity and you can associate it with something like choice, but there isn't necessarily a clear agent there, a clear agent who is making a clear choice.
Yeah.
Kind of
And it's
Spinozist.
and what's interesting about all of this too, for me, no, I can't right now. I love you. Yes, thank you. I'm sorry, ferrets. Thank you. I'm trying to be
That's
focused.
especially
All right.
funny where we can't see, so we can only just,
Yeah,
I'm getting some pretty cool imaginative possibilities from that.
I'm sorry. I love them, and I love my ferrets and boys. I just trying to get a thought out here. I'm sorry. What am I thinking? I was thinking, you were talking about Nietzsche and the being. Yeah, okay, yeah. The aspect of when he goes through these authentic and inauthentic modes, none of them are like violently opposed to each other, right? Like there's no clear distinction. There's nothing you can point to and say, well, that's inauthentic and that's authentic. They're they're veiled in some form of truth so that it can cover up itself because it's so close to authentic and inauthentic experiences. That it's like he's saying that truth as a phenomenon isn't something that you focus on for a structure or a locus or a system to define what it is. The differentiation in what truth is as a phenomenon lies at the core of your perspective and experiences in design. And that's really, really interesting to me in that the truth is still there, but it is essentially hidden. And your perspective plays an enormous role in how you find that out. Because for the inauthentic to really kind of mask itself, it has to be just the right amount, just the right amount of camouflage, so to speak, so that it's almost an authentic experience, but not quite.
So a lot of that reminds me of so this I'm getting this almost all from secondary sources or descriptions of this, but Kierkegaard's uh Night of Faith. Did I even get that right? That is it? Okay. So actually I get maybe I should uh explain my source and so get that the bingo card out of the way too. So
Yeah,
in A
Spinoza.
Thousand Plateaus, they mention so they're talking about becoming imperceptible and as this way of kind of evading judgment, evading kind of the systems of identification in society. And they mention Kierkegaard and this idea that you wouldn't be able to tell the Knight of Faith from some regular bourgeois somebody. And that's it's not a perceivable kind of thing that you can determine based off of some gross ontic detail about them. So I think that kind of goes along with that aspect of it, that yeah, you can't determine there's nothing I can point to and be like, oh yeah, that's we're not doing some like what is phrenology or so like measuring people's skulls and be like, yeah, totally authentic. Yeah. Although maybe spirit is a bone. So
Hegel,
That's
bingo.
there's a, there's a, I mean, there was this one part, two things about, I mean, like, yeah, the spirit is a bone thing. Well, just in support, literally in support of what you're saying, Chase, but also contra Heidegger, because I think he's being a little fuckhead. I think he's being cheeky at this sentence here. But I'm in agreement with what you're saying. And I'm also in agreement with what Hegel would say. But I think Heidegger, he makes this dig on 269. He's like, and this is exactly in line with what you're saying, that it's not phrenology to examine whether or not somebody's authentic or not. But on 269, it's like the third line. The ontological analysis of consciousness on which we are thus embarking is prior to any description and classification of experiences of consciousness with a capital E. And it was kind of like this, like, oh, like, hey, Winky, ooh, did you catch that? It was like the capital E made me just like, oh, fuck you, you know? Science of experience of consciousness being the prior title of Knowledge of Spirit. But so, and that's, I think he's making a point there that it's not about these, this hermeneutic of like litmus testing moments for authenticity or whatever from an outside, because otherwise that would bring them into experiences of consciousness, aka like things present at hand, right? Or yes, that would be treating authentic moments as like present at hand entities. Um, so I'm with you there. Also, this is an aside thought. When Hegel says the word nothing, the nothing of the thing, like of the other, I think Heidegger would almost be like, I thought about today about how the way that Hegel uses the word nothing and the way that Heidegger uses the word present at hand versus ready at hand, like as I think Heidegger's attempted a more refined distinction between the nothingness of a thing. I think that Hegel and Heidegger use, like Hegel uses the word nothing and Heidegger uses the word present at hand in very similar ways, actually, like to refer to similar things. Like I think the things that Hegel would call characterized by a nothingness, I think Heidegger would say are just present at hand. And so that's where Heidegger and Hegel would agree. It's like Hegel would be like, yeah, spirit's not a bone. It's a nothing. You know? So anyway, that's just, I just wanted to speak up. I just, sometimes I just go rabble, you know, like in defense of my, yeah, that's it.
Blessed be in the name of bones. Yeah, so that introduction to what is metaphysics, where Heidegger talks about the nothing that annihilates. He towards the end, he talks about Hegel's nothing and says that in one limited sense, he thinks Hegel's right, but then in some expanded sense, he has a qualification that says Hegel didn't quite get there, of course. But I think I don't remember the specifics of it, except I think he was referring to the way that Hegel talks about nothing in towards the beginning of the science of logic, where it's the whole being nothing, becoming thing. I mean, I may be wrong, but yeah, so there's definitely, he talks about Hegel's idea of nothing, or at least one idea of nothing. But yeah.
Well, I think just a guy again. I don't want us to get too in the weeds here, but just in that nothing. And this is fucking the problem is that Hegel had this attitude that was so like, these are some thoughts, some capital T thoughts I had in the bath, and these are irrefutable laws of nature. He's just fucking. He's really it's like Nevin. It's like you described. It's like that sort of 19th century German kind of like, I can use words in confusing ways because I remember them. And it's up to you, reader, to be man enough. I totally agree with you. I don't think there's like, definitely. I think he was doing that a lot. Like a lot. And one of those cases was his like just it's what I think you would call like an equivocation almost, right? Right? Which is just using a word multiple times without distinguishing between the meaning of those words, using the same word multiple times to mean different things without clarifying. And I agree. I totally agree. That's an equivocation. Like I agree. And I think there are certain cases where he's trying to do it intentionally to try to point out simultaneously valid meanings or interpretations that could be applied. Like I think sometimes he's doing that equivocating thing in order to point out, like, yeah, whichever one you go with, try it. Like you'll see, it'll work. Like it'll kind of gel. But one case of that, I don't know if he's necessarily doing it in the best way, but nothing, like the nothing of a thing versus nothingness, pure nothingness. It's nothing versus nothing. You see, it's stupid, but that's a case where, yeah, and I'm with you, or at least I'm with Heidegger in the sense that it's like, yeah, I've got some further hairs to split, some more things to refine. But actually, this is a good segue into a kind of a final, or this one of my. I didn't have so many questions this time, but I do have one, and this is kind of in this vein. I'm glad we're going on this. Um, and it's the status of the conscience, because we're talking about it's these authentic moments are not experiences that can be enumerated like bones on a chart. They're it's not that. You can't bring out calipers and figure out if somebody is authentic or not. But there is this attempt at specificity that Heidegger, which I love in Heidegger. Like it's very counter to Hegel in a certain sense. It's this really like very, very strong will toward specificity. I don't say will, but urge towards specificity. And here though he makes this statement that I wanted to get some clarification on. It's on Heidegger 269. It's kind of right at the end of our reading, right at the end. And it's about the call. It's about conscience. It's this middle paragraph on 269 that starts with conscience gives us something to understand. That I had a question about as to what the because I don't want to say metaphysical status. I don't know what Heidegger's stance on metaphysics are, and maybe Chase, oh God, I hope not. I'm not making you have to get into that, but in this paragraph, he says, conscience gives us something to understand. It discloses. By characterizing this phenomenon formally in this way, we find ourselves enjoined to take it back into its disclosedness. This disclosedness is a basic state of the entity which we ourselves are, is constituted by state of mind, understanding, falling, and discourse. If we analyze conscience more penetratingly, it is revealed as a call. And if Tristan were here, and he'd be on his feet, a call, a summons, but calling is a mode of discourse. The call of conscience that the character has, the call of conscience has the character of an appeal to Dasein by calling it to its own most potentiality for being itself, and this is done by way of summoning it to its own most being guilty. And the being guilty I don't understand, and the summoning I don't understand, but I just wanted to ignore those for now and say, I just want to know, what is this conscience? It's a discourse. It's like so conscience is always sort of a linguistic thing. And would Heidegger say that Dasein like can't exist without language? I don't know how much, I forget how much has Heidegger's talked about language, but I'm interested in that. And like, so like a Dasein, I would imagine, kind of ontologically requires language and discourse as like a part of itself in a way. Then that's my question: is like, what's the ontological or metaphysical status of consciousness, or not consciousness, conscience, if it is this seemingly purely discursive thing? I guess maybe it's not purely discursive. Calling is a mode of discourse, but that would mean that discourse is a big umbrella under which you have calling, and under call you have conscience, which means conscience is a mode of discourse, a linguistic thing.
He explicitly distinguishes between language and discourse. And even in this, I mean, I think he did way back when, and even in this section, of course, I'm not going to be able to find it, but he makes that distinction again in saying that language is, I don't know if a mode would be the right word, but language is like a mode of discourse, but discourse itself is not reducible to language. So I think discourse has something to do with communication of some kind or something like that. I'm not sure what the essence of discourse is, but it's not necessarily at least I don't think it can be reduced to language. Whether discourse is linguistic in some sense, I don't know, but I don't think it can't be. Discourse is not merely literal spoken language. It's not just that.
Yeah, I think this is in the very next section that we're going to read, but he says that it's not something necessarily that is uttered in language. Oh, he says for the okay, so when he's this is section 56, which is H272. So he starts talking about discourse and yeah, about gives information, something definite, communication, makes something accessible to the Dasein with of others, for the most part by way of uttering it in language. And then talks about how that connects with so discourse is also a mode of the disclosedness of Dasein, or how it understands itself. So it has to do with this kind of articulation of the understanding of itself. And that can be shared in either in communication, or I think in this case, it's something quite bizarre, I would say. So I think he's going to say something along the lines of it's not linguistic, and I think he says something like specifically that it's not some kind of like a verbal voice, the voice of conscience. Instead it's and I think the voice of conscience is going to be something along the lines of a kind of resolute silence. So it's that's going to be what discloses the disclosure of Dasein will be something like the nothingness of silence, which is going to be comparable to the nothingness that is revealed in anxiety, which is not a complete, utter nothingness, but a kind of nothingness in terms of the idle talk of the they self. So it's a silence in that regard. And that's going to be something that reveals the ownmost potentiality for being the self. So yeah. The never-ending story, the
That's a
nothingness. Oh god,
trigger.
I think I've
You
told this
can't.
story before, but I had a nightmare with that thing in it once. It gave me an idea to write an essay, but I never did it.
What trauma hasn't that inflicted on our generation? That and the Dark Crystal. Jesus Christ. Fucking movie. I mean,
I
I
know.
could we
What are you complaining about, Joseph?
right, right.
Did you watch The Never-Ending Story as a child and you were inadvertently brought to dangerously close to a mode of authenticity you weren't yet comfortable with? Because it
Maybe.
face to face with the possibility of your own most demise in the form of a nothing. Honestly like, are you complaining because it was philosophically profound?
It might have been. I was deeply disturbed over the poor rock creature having his friends ripped out of his hands and then watching a Kelfling have his soul extracted from him by the Skeksis.
What if
That in the friggin' swamps of sadness with Atreyu and his horse.
It's
No.
disclosing your own most possibilities.
The dread of loss there and the projects I had as a child of care individuated me certainly in that moment.
There you go. And I was going to suggest if it hadn't been, possibly, if it hadn't been for the never ending story and the Dark Crystal, you wouldn't have taken a path of philosophical inquiry later on in life. Maybe
Yep.
some seeds were planted there. So,
And I'm doing good tonight. I haven't mentioned the silence of the Tractatus or assistance in their builders when it comes to building certain projects with discourse. I'm tired. I'm sorry.
This ferret's tiring you out.
Yeah.
I can imagine. Yeah, I remember when I was a young child, I wasn't traumatized by this, but I remember I had a friend who had a bunch of ferrets and they were just crazy. It was just like
Oh, they're insane.
constant, just like high energy thing, just like yeah,
Yeah.
it was Yeah.
Yeah, they'll noodle your way in your heart, and like and I still haven't fully grasped the Wittgensteinian concept or thought project in PI on what he was meaning when it comes to the building project on the assistance, like the difference that he was implying between language and discourse himself, and how. I mean, it has nothing to do with Heidegger, but it led me to think about that. I don't know if my brain's ready to approach that even this evening. But ferrets are wonderful though. Maybe that's my project, my individuation of care and wanting the war dance noodles around me all the time.
I love, we had ferrets for many years and I love ferrets, but as I said in the chat, I literally have nightmares, a recurring nightmare about scraping ferret poop out of ferret cages.
Oh,
I have
I'm
nightmares. I have nightmares about
numb
that
to it.
shit.
Shit, yeah, stepping in it, cleaning it. It's
Stepping
a
in it. Yeah,
constant,
my
constant.
daughter said she developed a very high tolerance for disgusting, gross things after having stepped in ferret shit so many times. She's like,
Yeah,
well, you hop to the bathroom. That's just what you do.
we keep little wipies because like the you can potty train and they have certain corners they go to with puppy pads, but sometimes they just go. So
Yep.
wood floors for the win.
Yep. I was gonna make one more comment about the Kierkegaard connection and the Knight of Faith. I don't know that you know what when at least when he's talking about Abraham, you can't tell the difference between a Knight of Faith and a madman, because he does something totally counter to conventional morality when he tries to kill his son, and only a madman would try to do that. And so whether every Knight of Faith would look like a madman, I guess it depends on what command God gave him. If God gave him a command like go be nice to your kids, then he wouldn't look like a madman. But if he said, go kill everyone who's ever read Heidegger, then that would probably look like a madman. But I thought it was, maybe there is an interesting parallel in the sense that another interesting parallel in that if an authentic person actualizes possibilities that are not necessarily endorsed by the they, then that person might also look a little crazy. So if they're not, if someone has, to some degree anyway, sort of lifted themselves out of the limited possibilities of the they and do something that seems to not quite fit in, they'd be like, well, that's kind of crazy. So maybe there's another parallel there. Like, who would sit Monday
Schizo.
nights and read Heidegger? What?
Schizo.
Schizo, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, maybe. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely true. Which, but then that I guess it would have to be so they act outside of the parameters that are determined by the they self and the public interpretation. So like, that would then make them perceptible at that point,
Uh,
which
but not necessarily distinguishable from
mhm.
a mad person, for example, or
Right, right.
some other
I think
topic.
that would get into eventually how he kind of, at least this is also speculation, like pretty much everything I've said today. But so when he tries to reconcile kind of authenticity with then the being with others and all this stuff about history and tradition, I wonder exactly how he's going to do that. Although there's something of a hint, a slight hint, I think, in that so when he says that the choice that between possibilities that it shows all of Dasein's possibilities. including the what would normally be inauthentic, at least in that everyday mode, but there's possibilities that are still determined by being with others and also being alongside equipment and the ready to hand and whatnot. But then we still have to choose those things. It's not like an authentic Dasein would fly off into space and not do anything with others or have any kind of, I mean, to do that, you probably have to have equipment, at least some projects in the world in order to get your space apparatus to work to fly off. So anyways, there's still there has to be some kind of tension between authentic Dasein that is its own most non-relational, understands itself in terms of those possibilities, but then those possibilities still being of its being with others that is relational. So I think there's something like that going on in terms of, I don't think he wants it to be like the authentic person, wow, that was very negligent in my Heideggerian terminology there. Authentic Dasein person. Jesus Christ.
Okay.
I'm tired.
We'll let it slide this time.
Thank you. Too bad this is not recorded. Oh well. Maybe we'll edit that out.
Edit in post.
Not really, but
You got it.
Person earlier, so you can blame it on me.
oh, what was the point I was gonna make? I can't remember now. Oh, well, I'll just leave it there. It's probably good.
Something about not being, I mean, you still have to interact with others.
Oh yeah, so I think that what he the kind of authentic Dasein, not person necessarily, but also kind of, but so that would be something that he doesn't want it to be completely alien to, I would say, even the historical tradition ultimately of the community, or how, I can't remember exactly how he puts it later in the book when he's talking about history and whatnot. But so I think that would go more with that kind of that there isn't something necessarily to distinguish an authentic Dasein, but ultimately, I mean, I guess the thing that I was could say worry about, if I'm, I don't know if I'm worried about, whether Heidegger is doing something that I could be down with or not. But so the thing that it looks like he's almost he's trapping himself in this corner where he has to say, oh, the authentic person chooses to do inauthentic things, but does it authentically. And so, because otherwise you could have some kind of external way of at least looking at something, be like, this person behaves outside of the normal bounds of public interpretedness. So is that authentic or not? It seems like he can't say that. And anyways, that's too radical for Heidegger anyways. He doesn't want people, I think, radically acting outside of norms. I don't know, lots of speculation there, but that's my thoughts on it.
I mean, my guess, and this is just a guess too, is that a person acting authentically might sometimes do things that fit in with norms, and might sometimes do things that don't. That they're making authentic choices, and some will fit and some won't. And then also, like I put in the note, I got the impression from something that we talked about in the last week or two that it's not like there's the saint of authenticity who always acts authentically, but probably people act authentically every now and then, I'm guessing.
Yeah, or you could have some kind of exceptional experience where the phenomena becomes clear, and then it can kind of push you more in that direction, but it's still kind of a matter of degrees. Which I'm not sure if Heidegger would exactly agree with that, but at least that makes a little more sense to me of the overall idea.
Acting authentically sounds exhausting.
It's only because you're looking at it as an actualization of an event rather than a possibility. I don't know, man. I'm tired.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So it's possibility as possibility. That's never, we didn't talk at all about the actualization, which, I think that'll be okay. I think I'll live that.
I think we should hammer that out before we go tonight.
I need idle talk. I can't. I can't.
I'm going to go watch something stupid on Netflix. That's my solution. Or my daughter and her husband got a subscription to Paramount, so now I can watch things like Picard and The Stand, things like that. So.
Oh, Picard is so good. I bet you'll enjoy it.
The what?
Picard. It's a Star Trek spinoff. It's about Picard when he gets really old.
Yeah, one of these days the Federation will realize maybe don't give Romulans weapons, but haven't gotten there yet.
Nerds.
What I loved is I was watching the second season here a few nights ago, and in the second season they have to go back in time to 2024 because of reasons. But they're I've forgotten where they're someplace, and the camera pans by this bottle of whiskey, and it actually pauses momentarily and then keeps going on. So I backed it up and looked, and it's a bottle of whiskey from a craft distillery in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I used to live. And I looked it up, and there's an actual distillery. So I don't know if that was a case of product placement, but I was like, oh, look, there's a real bottle of whiskey from a real distillery right there. I thought that was kind of cute. Anyway, yeah, that's what I do when I.
Oh yeah, no, I agree. I do something even nerdier than you, Nevitt. I think I watch shitty movies with my roommate. I'm gonna do that in 20 minutes from now, and I will point out actors and actresses in these terrible movies and be like, literally, we were watching some terrible piece of shit called The Baby about a big baby, and I was like, hey, and my friends were watching, and I was like, hey, did you see that lady who plays the sister who looks
Are
like
you neurodivergent?
I don't know. I've
Because
never
we
had
do
that
that.
checked.
We do that. It drives my sons crazy. I'll do the same thing. I'll say randomly that person's from this movie and we've seen it from this series and over there, and I'll just blurt it out, and I'm like, oh shit, I shouldn't have done that.
I just yesterday I was like, hey, that lady in The Baby who looks like Barbarella, she was in Star Trek, the original series in an episode called Dagger of the Mind.
See,
She plays Dr. Mariana Knoll.
Yes.
And everybody's like, why the fuck do you know that?
So rather than doing MST3K like as the theme, we point out random references to other sub movies, and I'm right there with you. I swear to God, it's an ADHD thing.
I think it's just you see Star Trek people everywhere. They like just random people from these episodes are just in everything. If you know where to look,
The guy that played the engineer, the engine room engineer guy in The Next Generation, he's been in all sorts of movies. I've seen him all over the place. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so I'm the exact opposite because, okay, I think the part of the brain that recalls actors, actresses, whatever, it's damaged in me. I can't recall it, and it's so hard for me to figure out actors that are in different things. I'll have no idea that I can't tell that it's the same person. And
I'm with you too.
even if somebody points it out, they'll be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'd never." If somebody hadn't pointed it out, I wouldn't have known, and I have no idea. I can't remember any of their names. yeah, it's just like I've given up anytime somebody talks about actors' names, I'm just so lost. I
Right.
just yeah.
I'm with you, Chase. And probably you have the same experience. Family Guy just doesn't make sense. Like nearly three-quarters of their jokes,
Yeah.
they reference some celebrity I've never heard of. You know what I mean? Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
she has more, she has a bigger butt than I don't know. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's just like all the time, all these celebrities, like, I don't, I don't know. I, it's perfect for people like Hunter and Joseph. You know what I mean? They'll pick up all those references. They're ready for those jokes. But
Yeah. I
like you
played
and me,
some this board game. No, it wasn't a board game, it was a some like online game thing. And the topic was pop culture, and it was some kind of trivia thing. And I was just had no idea who any of these people they were referring to were. So basically, I don't know anything about pop culture, especially names. I no idea what's going on. I basically live in like 1960s avant-garde French intellectual scene. That's like that's my milieu. And I have no idea what's going on in the world. Um,
Speaking,
Except for soccer.
oh yeah, that's true. Actually, soccer is kind of like it's my way of like absorbing into a version of the self kind of. It's definitely
I
my way of kind of like chilling out and kind of doing something a little different.
More normal.
Yeah.
did you see Asterix and the 12 Tasks, Chase? The 1960s French avant-garde cartoon with Asterix and Obelix. I feel like I need to get you a copy of this because you would particularly love it. Like they're Gauls that the Romans think are gods, so they give them 12 tasks to prove whether or not they're gods or humans. And the humor and the animation is amazing. Obelix fell into the cauldron of elixir that the Gauls used to give them power, like see, magic. It's like a potion formula that the Druids made that has like a Tiresias vibe to them. But one of the tasks they give them, because it's such adult-oriented humor in a cartoon, is Asterix has to go into a Greek pantheon and get a particular form that's known for its bureaucracy. But anybody who goes in looking for this form of 8288 goes insane trying to deal with the bureaucracy. So his method of dealing with it is to ask them for an additional form that doesn't exist to drive everybody in the bureaucracy insane looking for this form. And he just goes in and picks it up and leaves. And like Obelix loves to eat, so he's like a vegetarian. They go to an island of nymphs where it's nothing but sex and Epicurean hedonism. But an Asterix is completely enthralled with staying there, and he's going to fail this task. But when Obelix finds out they're vegetarians, he just drives them off the island because he can't imagine a world where there's no steak or wild boar to eat. It's
What
it's an
can you put the name of
amazing
that in
cartoon.
the chat?
Yeah, Asterix, and the 12 tasks.
So some of what you're saying sounded almost like if you've seen the movie, I think it was in the 80s, Brazil. I think it's Terry Pratchett. Um
no, Terry Gilliam,
Terry Gilliam. Yeah.
Form 27B stroke 6.
Yeah,
You
that's
should
a
know
great
this.
movie of
27B stroke 6.
bureaucracy. Yeah.
Your very own number on your very own door. Dude, I know Eric and I rattled off about that movie.
Okay, I was not expecting uh quotes from well done, but
One of
yeah.
my favorite movies. It's like definitely top three. Brazil.
Wow. Wasn't okay. What I mean, I've only seen it once and I liked it. But yeah, I wasn't expecting that.
That's another one that I saw when I was a kid, and then multiple times after.
Dude, I saw The Piano Teacher when I was a kid, and that fucked me up. That was weird. Watching a guy get like an HJ in a bathroom from his like 50-plus-year-old French piano teacher, that was cray cray. My brother was showing me all kinds of kooky stuff. But that was a big one for me. Brazil, I didn't get to until my later years. I saw like Old Boy when I was young. Whatever, I don't know. Shit like
Old Boy, the old one or the remake?
the Korean one. Yeah.
Yeah,
Kurosawa.
I like that movie. That's great.
Yeah.
No, but again, and I guess maybe a part of me was like, maybe my brother was doing me a service, trying to confront me with my inner ownmost being, by showing me like this man like cut off his own like tongue and like hypnotize himself to have sex with his daughter or whatever. That was probably good by Heidegger's measure.
Wait, what movie is this?
Old Boy.
Old
That's like
Boy.
that's like the crux of
Okay.
the narrative.
I thought you were still talking about Piano Teacher, which I haven't seen.
No. Oh, that's
And
good.
then, okay, I totally know you're talking. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But
Piano Teacher's good. It's just, yeah.
You know, I haven't seen that in a while. It's probably been, I don't know how many, like 5, 6 years probably. So maybe that's due for a rewatch.
I saw
Maybe.
Asterix when I was young. Of course, the Dark Crystal Labyrinth, the standards. The ones that probably shouldn't have watched that made a little bit of an impact was The Wicker Man and Evil Dead at a really young age.
Oh yeah. I was listening to a podcast last night on The Evil Dead 2.
Oh,
Quite interesting.
classic.
Yeah. I think I saw that when I was probably like 17 and I think like super high. I don't I don't remember that much of it, but I remember thinking it was pretty outrageous.
It was. It is. I got to meet Bruce Campbell twice. He's a really cool dude. Really, I liked him in The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. quite a bit, but we were in like some type of QA because he was doing a showing of The Man with the Screaming Brain in Pittsburgh, and somebody asked him in the QA, "How'd you get in character for the scene in Evil Dead 2 when your hand became possessed and you had to cut it off and then put it under a bucket with like what was the copy of the book he put on top of it?
Necronomicon Ex Mortis.
No, I think it was like an end of war or something. I can't remember it's like it's like a pacifist piece or farewell to arms. He put a copy of
Oh
Farewell
yeah,
to Arms
yeah.
on top of the bucket to keep the hand in, and Campbell just looked at the guy and he's like, "Have you seen my movie? Like, I, I character? What are you talking about? It was mindless splatter stick." So
He was in a TV series that my wife and I
Burn
watched a
Notice,
lot of. What's that?
Burn
Burn
Notice.
Notice. Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he actually plays a fairly normal guy there.
I love him. I gotta go too. I'm talking randomness.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Adios. Hasta la
Take care.
vista.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody. Good night.
Bye.